Greetings, friends and family. We're back for another installment in our study in the Word. We are in Romans chapter 7, picking up where we left off last time. We're going to read verses 7 and 8 this time and continue talking about what Paul is writing here. He says, "What shall we say then? Is the law sin? God forbid. Nay, I had not known sin but by the law. For I had not known lust except the law had said, Thou shalt not covet. But sin, taking occasion by the commandment, wrought in me all manner of concupiscence. For without the law, sin was dead." And so, Paul's continuing his teaching here on the relation of a believer to the law, and that we are dead to the law because the law merely stirs up the evil propensity that mankind has towards sin, however it may express itself in thousands of different ways. The same lustful, passionate, sinful desire still dwells in the heart of every man, woman, boy, or girl, because we were all born into sin, and we live under that law of sin until we come to Jesus Christ. And if you'll remember, the overall theme of chapter 6, 7, and 8 is sanctification by faith, growing in grace and knowledge. And in chapter 6, Paul discussed our identity with Christ and dying with him, the old man, and being raised again in newness of life. And now in chapter 7, he, and there's more to it than that, but, for the sake of time, I don't want to rehash all of it. But, now he's he who sins is a slave of sin, basically was, the last part of the chapter, the last part that he, concept or idea that he was making. Now he's talking about how our relationship to the sin nature should be dead, and that it should no longer have dominion over us, but now living our lives by a new power source, as we're led by the Holy Spirit, because we're born again, and now we have a relationship with Christ instead of a relationship with the law and sin. But and so the last time we read verses 4 through 6, where he basically says that when we were in the flesh, the passions of sin, the motions of sin, worked out of us the fruit of the wages of sin, which is death. The passions were worked up in us for sin, and that the execution of that sin, whatever it might be, ultimately brings death, which is separation from God. And I know I've belabored the point too long, but he said, "What shall we say then? Is the law sin? God forbid." The law is not sin. And again, this is another instance of that phrase we see quite frequently used, God forbid, which is actually in the original language, away with the thought, or no, that can't be, far be it from me, basically, is the idea. Nay, he says, no, I would not have known sin, but by the law. I wouldn't know what sin is except the law had told me what it is. For I had not known lust except the law had said, Thou shalt not covet. And, one of the things to remember here is, and we'll talk about it in the next verse too, but that word lust, covet, and then the next big word that he uses here is concupiscence, which is, they're all basically the same thing in the original language, just kind of little different hints or angles of the same word, and basically the same meaning. But he said, I had not known lust except the law had said, Thou shalt not covet. I wouldn't know what lust was, what covetousness is, except the law had told me not to do it. And we talked in the previous video a little bit about how it isn't until we are given a prohibition as humans that once we're given a prohibition, there comes a natural tendency to want to push that barrier, to want to exceed that prohibition, to want to do whatever we're told not to do. That's just in the rebellious nature of the heart of man. Again, that sin nature. And he says, I had not known lust except the law had said, thou shalt not covet. But sin, taking occasion by the commandment, wrought in me all manner of concupiscence, for without the law, sin was dead. And so, he says, but sin taking the occasion by the commandment, that phrase taking occasion in the original language has the idea of like a military setting up a base of operation. Like when there's a war, one country will go to war against another, and if they take over a piece of territory in that other country's region, they will set up a base of operation, to continue advancing, to hopefully win the war. That's kind of one of the tactics of war that's been used for millennia since mankind started war. But at any rate, he says, but sin, taking occasion by the commandment, or setting up a base of operation in our hearts because of the commandment. And this, refers far more to than just the law of Moses, the 10 Commandments, or any of the other rules, statutes, regulations given in the Old Testament by God through Moses, but also the law of the conscience. We're born with the ability, to know right from wrong, even though we may not be able to articulate where that comes from. As lost people, people are intuitively born with the ability to know right from wrong. Now, it gets easily perverted, and but every civilization that's ever lived has had societal rules and regulations that they go by, because there's something in them that tells them, in order to maintain order in our society, we have to have these rules. And unfortunately, there's always been breakers of the rules in these societies. And so there's never been, nor will there ever be until Christ returns, what humanists call a utopia in this world. It ain't ever going to happen. But he says, but sin, verse 8 again, taking occasion by the commandment, setting up this base of operation in our heart because of the commandment, wrought or worked in me all manner of concupiscence, which is basically another word for sinful desires. For without the law, sin was dead. Years ago, I heard a pastor friend say, he was teaching one time, and he talked about the word lust. In our modern vernacular and our modern usage of the word, we tend to think of lust as just an inordinate sexual desire. That's basically, when we talk about lust, that's most of the time what people are talking about. But, you can lust for a lot of other things, for power, for money, control, recognition, praise. You can lust for a lot of other things other than just inordinate sexual desires. And so lust is an inordinate a desire for something that some kind of way either goes against God or hurts other people in the pursuit and fulfillment of that lust. And it's only a temporary satisfaction. My friend that I was mentioning just a minute ago gave an operational definition for the word lust, which I thought was really good. He said, lust is the quest for control. Whatever field or area, facet or aspect of life that a person may be in, when they're lusting, it is a quest for control. And that this lust is brought out of the human heart, is exposed because the law of God exposes it. And so he said, I would not have known what lust was, except the law had said, thou shalt not covet. But sin, taking occasion by the commandment, wrought in me, or worked in me, all manner of concupiscence, which is just another word for lust. For without the law, or apart from the law, sin was dead. It had no effect when there's no law there. And so I'm out of time. I got to go. I love y'all, and I'll catch you later. Bye.